Welcome to this week's Parsha discussion class. I wanted to start by saying, as we sort of settle into this mitzvah of the week category, I think I got a little distracted by the all of the halachic minutia. And so my goal moving forward is to look at the halacha, but then also maybe to explore the mitzvah from some other direction so that we keep some, hashkafa in this space and not just like a strict halacha class. So let me know if you think I'm getting the balance right, but I'm going to try to do that a little bit more today. Let me share my screen. This week's, oops, oh, hold on. It is locking me out of the, okay, just, oh man, I hope this works. Now I have to verify that it's me. Um, our our internet has become our passwords have become so secure at Skokie Valley that I am not even allowed to use them. Hold on one second. Sorry. Um, I will sign us in, but we'll start by, gosh, I'll sign us in if I can. Um, we will start by looking at the mitzvah, which is that of davening, using the anchor in the text, and then looking at both the sort of halachic question of whether or not Maariv is reshut or chava, obligation or optional. And then, sorry, I'm a terrible multitasker, just trying to get my password here. Um, and then we will look at like what is special about Maariv. If we think about each tefillah as its own thing, which gives us its own lesson, um, we'll think about what is special and what we can gain from Maariv. Okay, I feel ready, hopefully. Let's see. Um, Here we go. Ooh, maybe almost. Let's see. Okay, you can see, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so the Parsha anchor, as you will, and there are actually two psukim we'll look at. We'll look at this pasuk and then again another pasuk at the end. Um, right, Esav has found out that Yaakov has stolen the bracha of the Bechor from Esav, questionably, perhaps. And Esav is so upset at the end of last week's Parsha, right? He lets out this great yell of pain and he promises that he's going to kill Yaakov. And so Rivka sends him towards Haran. So he leaves his home and he's on his journey. And the Torah tells us, Vayifga b'makom vayalen sham kiva hashemesh. Right, the Yaakov has come upon is how it's translated here. Right, Vayifga is to happen upon, maybe by chance, to a certain place, and he stops there for the night because the sun had set. And so he takes the stones to make like a pillow, and he lies down in that place. So there are a few different places where we talk about the origin of the tefillot, and I actually realized what would have been cool if I were to do this Bereshit mitzvah class again. I think we would have started this discussion 2 weeks ago in Chaye Sarah, which is where it really starts with Abraham, and then sort of carried it through to today to think about all the tefillot, but that's for next time. Because there are several places where there is a discussion about what causes us to daven the way we daven today, 3 times a day. And the first answer comes from our Parsha, right? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says in the Yerushalmi Gemara in Brachot, he says, Tfilot me'avdot limdum, right? We learn how to structure our tefillot from our avot, from our forefathers. Tfilat hashachar me'avraham avinu, right? Avraham is the one who instituted the tefillah of shacharit because it says, Vayashkem Avraham ba'boker el hamakom asher amad sham et pnei Hashem. That Avram got up early in the morning to go to the place where he stood towards the face of God. Ve'ein amida ela tefillah, right? And standing means tefillah. That's like the first, right? What is tefillah? Tefillah is amidah. It's standing, it's showing up, it's being there, it's instigating the conversation. Tefillat hamincha me Yitzchak Avinu, right? Yitzchak is the one who instituted mincha from the pasuk Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. Yitzchak went out to lasuach, which we translate here as converse, but it's like not entirely clear in the field before the evening, right? And then again, this phrase ve'ein ticha ele tefillah. And conversing means tefillah. So, right, Yitzchak shows us this totally different side of davening, right? Davening takes place outside in the field, not with other people, where we talk sort of just directly to God as opposed to it being more formal, maybe. And then from our pasuk, right, and both of those take place in Chayei Sarah, Tfilat ha'erev miYaakov Avinu v'yifka b'makom vayelen sham, right, that's our pasuk, ve'en pikia ela tfilah. And encountering, right, sort of encountering by chance or happening upon means tfilah. So if we think about tefillah as originating from the Avot, as is quoted Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi here, um, they should all be the same level of obligation, of obligatory, right? Because they all stem from the Avot in some way. And B, we learn something interesting about davening, which is that Amidah, Sicha, and Pikiah are these building blocks of what it means to daven. So that's one option. The second option, which I brought from the Talmud Bavli, is um, a discussion between Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, and interestingly, Rabbi Hoshua ben Levi, which, as you'll see here, right, Rabbi Hoshua ben Levi is on the side of the Avot. When it's recorded in the Bavli, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is on the other side of the argument. I don't know what to make of that, but the Yerushalmi was very nicely able to concise, able to quote it for the Avot easily. So that's where I started. And now confusingly, Rabbi Hoshua ben Levi is going to say something totally different, right? In the Bavli, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says Tfilot Avot Tiknum, that the way that the Avot daven is the way we set up our davening. And Rabbi Hoshua ben Levi Amar Tfilot Keneged Tmidin Tiknum. Rabbi Hoshua ben Levi says, no, it's actually based on the way that we offered korbanot. Um, and the Gemara explains Tanya Kavate Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, but Tanya Kavate Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. We have a proof text from a Breita on both sides of this argument, and so the Breita for Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says Umipnei ma amru tfilat ha'erev. Right, I cut out Shacharit and Mincha because they're not as important to us, right? But they're based on different korbanot. What is the korban that correlates to Maariv time? ומפני מה אמרו תפילת ערב אין לה קבע. And why do we say that it doesn't have a fixed time or a fixed pattern? Shahare evarim ufedarim shelo nitachlu miba'erev krevim v'hochim kol halayla. Because what is being offered at the nighttime is the remains of the different animals that weren't consumed on the fire during the daytime, right? So the shacharit and mincha offering, so to speak, whatever is remaining is burnt on the altar sort of continuously throughout the night. So if we're going to pinpoint a time of day in which you have to say shacharit, right? Oh, you want to make sure you daven by the time of Zman Kriyat Shema, right? That is based on the idea of the korbanot. But the korban that corresponds to Maariv is not set. It doesn't have a fixed time. It's just until the next morning, right? So when we think about this idea, if we base the Maariv davening on the idea of korbanot, it seems like it might be a reshut. It might be optional, right? You didn't have to have remains to burn. It's only if you had them that you burned them. And if you base the pattern of davening on the avot, then it seems more clear that it would be an obligation, although we'll explore some of those ins and outs. Okay, so far we have Yaakov Avinu possibly being the originator of Maariv, or at least that's one option. Okay, so now we're going to look at the mitzvah, right? If this is the mitzvah of the week, what kind of mitzvah is it? So the Rambam starts us off by saying, mitzvat aseh lihitpalel b'chol yom. So it seems that the Rambam is saying we're going to count davening as a Torah level positive commandment. Um, Not from our Parsha, no surprise, but from Shemot, where it says, "Va'avadatem et Hashem Elokechem," right? If we're supposed to serve Hashem, mipnei hatefillah lamdu she'avodah zohi tefillah. Right, here's another sort of formula of what tefillah is supposed to be. It's supposed to be some kind of avodah. And then another proof text, right? Shneimar ulavdo b'chol levavchem, that we should serve Hashem with all of our heart. Amru hachachamim, ezo hi avodah shebalev zo tefillah. Right? What is the avodah of our hearts? What is the service of our hearts? That is tefillah. Right? Here's another interesting, right? So now we have amidah, sicha, pigia, avodah, and specifically avodah shebalev. These are the things, the ways that we should approach tefillah. The ein minyan hatfilot min haTorah. However, the number of times that we daven is not a Torah level mitzvah. Ve'ein mashana hatfila hazot min haTorah. Ve'ein la tefila zman kavua min haTorah. Right? The order of the tefillot, the time of the tefillot, and the number of tefillot that we do every day are not deoraita. Only a mitzvah to daven at some point in the day seems to be the deoraita thing. I didn't bring us the Ramban here, but the Ramban actually says all tefillah is derabanan, even that sort of once a day kind of situation. The only time that tefillah is doraita is during a time of crisis. So if you're davening for rain, or you're davening to end a war, or you're davening to bring back hostages, that perhaps is the Oraita level. But for the Ramban, right, Nachmanides, that it's all Durabanan. The Rambam, Maimonides, right, does believe that davening is a Torah level mitzvah, but not any of the details, only that sort of overarching theme. Um, so, um, so who decides, right, the number of tefillot, and is Maariv optional or obligated, comes later on in the Rambam. Here the Rambam says, right, v'chein tiknu sheyehei minyan hatefillot k'minyan hakorbanot. So now the Rambam seems to be saying that the Yaakov Avinu has nothing to do with it, right? It's the corresponding to the two daily sacrifices, right? Keneged shnei timidin. V'chol yom sheyesh korban musaf tikno bo tefillah shlishit keneged korban musaf, right? On Shabbat, on Yom Tov, on Rosh Chodesh, when we daven musaf, that's because there was a musaf korban. It's not because some extra avot, right, davened at that time. Utfilah shehi keneged himid shel boker, he creates tfilat hashachar, right? So the morning korban is called tfilat hashachar or shacharit. Utfilah keneged hamid shel ben ha'arbaim, he creates tfilat mincha. And the musaf will be corresponding to the musaf. V'chein tiknu sheyehei adam mitpalel tefillah achat balayla, shaharei evarei tamid shel ben ha'arbaim mitachlim v'hochin kol halayla. Right. So this Rambam should feel very similar or familiar to the brachot. Right. He seems to be on the side of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, that this all neatly lines up to the korbanot. Now, what does the Rambam take from this? Ve'ein tfilat arvit chova k'tfilat shacharit u'mincha. Right? If we're going the way of the korbanot, then Maariv is not going to be obligatory. V'afal pichein nahagu kol Yisrael b'chol mekomot moshvotechem litzbalel arvit v'kibula aleim k'tfilat chova. However, even if technically it's not obligatory, we as a people have taken this mitzvah on to be as though it is chova. This is an interesting thing. There's one other example I can think of where this has happened. Anyone want to take a stab before I spill the beans? We often say that women accepted upon themselves the mitzvah of shofar as though they were obligated in it, right? Which is why we go to such great lengths to make sure everyone hears the shofar. Um, if you went to a Jewish day school, perhaps you are familiar with this argument that like we shouldn't, if you were caught not in Maariv, kids would say like, "Oh, I'm not going 3 times in a row because it's only optional until I sort of accept it upon myself." So the Rambam is not playing any tefillah attendance games. What he's saying is, if we're going to anchor this in the korbanot, it will seem as though Maariv is not an obligation. But don't worry, we've actually accepted it as an obligation. That, although he doesn't cite the avot reason for davening, I think it's a nice way of sort of acknowledging it, right? If Abraham and Yitzchak's davenings are obligatory, we should make Yaakov's davening obligatory too. And so we're going to accept it upon ourselves, even if it might not technically fit into the structure. So the last piece of halacha in halacha's sake is this really interesting Aruch HaShulchan, where the Aruch HaShulchan is actually worrying about a different issue, which is that of women and slaves, who unfortunately often get lumped into the same category. And he's wondering, are they obligated in tefillah? Now, this is an interesting question when we think about our Torah obligations and our rabbinic obligations, and whether or not the timing is rigid, right? Because generally we say that women are not obligated in mitzvot aseh shehazman grama, where there's a time-bound nature to them, right? And so here, the Aruch HaShulchan says, "Nashim va'avadim afal pisha p'turim mikriyat Shema chayavim b'tfilah." Right, so Shema might be time bound, but the obligation of tefillah begadol is not. Right, the Chatav HaRambam, Reish Perek Rishon Hatam. Right, we saw this Rambam, Mishum Dehave Mitzvot Aseh Shelo Hazman Grama. Right, that the biblical mitzvah of davening is about that the Avadatem et Hashem once a day. It's not about the specific times that the rabbi set later, right? Kolomar, like to say, the Sfira le de Tefillah have mitzvot aseh deoraita, right? So the Aruch HaShulchan, following the Rambam, is saying davening is a positive mitzvah from the Torah. Umi deoraita ein lazman kavua, and there's no set time from the Torah. V'lachein have mitzvot aseh she'ein hazman grama, right? And therefore, women should be obligated. V'lefichach, af agav derabanan ka'avu zmanei hatfilah. Even though the rabbi set times, mikol makom shita shelo ba'u hakel al haTorah lepatur nashim va'avadim mimitzvah zo. I think this is a beautiful way to approach thinking about mitzvot. The Aruch HaShulchan is saying, like, chas v'shalom, that they would try to exclude, to nullify women and slaves from doing this important mitzvah in which they are obligated, right? If the rabbis thought that by setting times for the davening that they would exclude nashim va'avadim from one tefillah a day, that wouldn't have been their intent. So, I would say that even though there is sort of a reshut and chovah tension to Maariv, there is certainly more that comes out on the side of it being chovah. Even if we go with the korbanot route, which is it seems like it would be more of a optional davening. We obligate ourselves, sort of according to the Rambam. And if we go through the side of Yaakov being the precursor for Maariv, generally we would say that it is a chovah. It seems like sometimes there are moments where we waive the Maariv davening if you're traveling or if it's dangerous for you to stop because it's dark out. And so we generally understand that if there are exceptions, that means generally it is obligated. So I would say, in terms of that great question of is Maariv optional or mandatory, no matter how you get there, most people arrive at the mandatory option. It's always great to make a minyan, especially at Skokie Valley, or to daven in a minyan. And I think that that's interesting. But as I said at the beginning, I think I had gotten a little too micro-focused on the halacha of the mitzvot. And so I wanted to also think about the meaning of the tefillah of Arvit, of Maariv, and how we arrive there from this week's Parsha. So not to lose, so we'll look at the mitzvah, and now we're going to sort of swing back towards the Parsha a little bit. Um, and to do that, we have to look at one more pasuk. Right. So just to remind everyone, I'm going to scroll fast if you get sick from that scrolling. Okay. Right. Pasuk Yud Aleph is Vayifga b'makom vayalen sham kiva hashemesh. Right. That Yaakov stops for the night because it has gotten dark. And Vayifga, right, we learn Ein Pikia Ela Tefillah. So we come to understand that that means he davened at this place that he sort of happens upon by chance. And he was there because the sun had set. Then he lies down and he has his dream. And now we pick the story back up a few psukim later. Vayikat Yaakov Mishnato. Right? Yaakov wakes up from his sleep. Vayomer Achein Yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh va'anochi lo yadati. He says, surely Hashem is present in this place and I did not know it. Right? There's some kind of surprise. Okay, so let's use those psukim and the idea that Maariv is set, at least in part because of Yaakov Avinu, to think about what is special about Maariv. I actually think Maariv is a sort of unsung hero of davening, right? If you go to school, you daven Shachrit and sometimes even Mincha, but Maariv, it's often too early to daven Maariv at school. So kids don't often daven Maariv. Often, like, nighttime is rushed or harried, or you have other things to do. Right? People wake up with the best of intentions and daven Shachrit, but then maybe they slip by. So what is special about Maariv? It's also a short tefillah. It's hard to sort of motivate yourself to go back to shul for it. So I want to look at a few different ideas. The first is from Breshit Rabbah. Breshit Rabbah says, "V'ifga b'makom bikesh la'avor na'asa ha'olam kulo kamin kotel lefanav." He encountered the place, and it seems like Yaakov wanted to press on, right? Let me just go a little bit further, but the world became like this kotel, this wall in front of him. Kiva hashemesh, Rabbanan imre kiva hashemesh, melamed shehishkia hakadosh baruch hu, galgal chama shelo ba'avonata bishvil ledaber im Yaakov Avinu b'tzin'ah. There's something about the darkness that appears important, right? Why does it say kiva hashemesh in our pasuk? Because the sun had set. So the Rabbanan understand that that is because it was unusual. Like the sun shouldn't have set yet. And it's why maybe he wanted to keep going, right? Like if you're planning your road trip and you're like, well, it will get dark at 8:30, and then all of a sudden at 7 o'clock it gets dark. You might be like, well, I want to keep going. But it seems as though Hashem wanted to speak to Yaakov in private. And I think there is something sort of intimate about the darkness that comes at the time that we daven Maariv. And they give this really a very sweet, I think, mashal. Mashal ohavo shel melech sheba etzlo lifrakim. This is analogous to a king's friend, a beloved friend, who would come to him on occasion. Amar hamelech kivu et hanerot, kivu et nasin, sha'ani mevakesh ledaber imo havi b'tzina. And when the friends would come, the king would say, like, turn off the bright lights. Right? It's almost like set the mood lighting, make it more intimate in the room, right? Turn off the fluorescence. I want to speak with my friend privately. Kach hishkia hakadosh baruch hu galgal chama shelo ba'onata, right? Hashem caused the sun to set not at the right time. Bishvil daber im Yaakov Avinu b'tzina. And so I think there's something beautifully intimate about Maariv time. It is hard in a shul context, and it's hard in most of the world where we often daven Maariv early. It's not yet dark. But I think this idea of davening in the dark is really quite beautiful, and something to hold on to from this week's parsha. Then I want to look at three sort of radically different rabbis who all are inspired by Yaakov's prayer. So Rabbi Chaim Meir Soloveitchik is a much more modern thinker. And he writes that, and I apologize for this very brief excerpt, right? But he is talking about this pikia of Yaakov's, this idea of sort of happening upon God, is integral to the act of prayer. if the person who's praying's heart does not turn from other things, and he does not see himself or herself as standing before God and praying, then this is not an act of prayer. He is like one who is busy with other matters and not involved in the mitzvah. So it seems like, and we can apply this, I think, to more than just Yaakov's davening, that Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying that, right, Yaakov, it was the pigia, the sort of like sudden encounter, was where he turned to God, to face God, to really realize that God is there. Or perhaps the Amidah, right, the standing of Avraham Avinu before God is integral to davening. And what he's saying is you cannot just mumble the words of the Siddur while in your brain you construct your Shabbos grocery list or, all the other things you have to do that night before you go to bed. That if you're not viewing yourself as standing before God and you're not turning to davening, then it doesn't really count.
Excuse me, Rabbanit.
Yes, please.
Are you going to be quoting the Im Havanim Smecha?
I am not. Would you like to share what you think fits in?
Yeah, after you're finished.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so from Rabbi Chaim Meir Soloveitchik, I want to turn to the Maor V'Shemesh, a much more Hasidic text, Rabbi Kalman Epstein of Krakow. And here he makes a sort of different, but I think like we're building a similar observation. And here he does it with a beautiful play on words. Right here in our pasuk, it says, "Vayikat Yaakov Mishnato," which is translated as sleep, like Shena. But here, the Ma'or V'Shemesh is going to say it's not Mishnato from his sleep, but it's Mishnato from his Mishnah, from learning his Mishnayot. Um, I'm looking. Okay, V'hikat Mishnato v'hut Tamaverit. He woke from his sleep and he was surprised. Um, Interesting. Our Hebrew and English is not matching up perfectly here. But that's okay. We're going to say, here it is, V'nira levaer dehine yadua she'ikar avodat ha'adam lavo l'tchilat shleimut ba'avodato yitbarach shemo lahaskia elokotav yitbarach shemo hu al yedei haTorah v'hatfilah. Right, from this play on words of sleep and Mishnahs, we learn that the essence of a person's tefillah or avodah is to come to perfect service, right? L'tchilat hashleimut of God, and to grasp the meaning of God both through Torah and tefillah. There cannot be one without the other, right? Lo yuchal liot echad belo hasheni. Ki lo am haaretz chasid, v'gam b'Torah lichud lo yishalim nafsho k'ma'amar chachamav zal kol ha'omer ein ela Torah ein lo Torah. Right? This is I think a beautiful idea, right? There cannot be one without the other. You can't come to tefillah without your mishnayot, but if you only learn your mishnayot, you'll never get to your tefillah. Right? An Am Haaretz does not become a chassid, and conversely, one who says there's nothing in the world for me except for Torah does not even have Torah. I think that is so beautiful, far beyond this context, right? When we are so focused on our sefer in front of us and we miss the things around us, that is not Torah, right? There's a story that I'm going to butcher about a famous rabbi whose son, I think, was learning Torah, didn't even hear his baby crying, right? And then the famous rabbi closed the sefer and went to comfort the baby in his crib, right? That if you can't hear the crying of your baby over the learning of your Torah, you're doing something wrong, right? If there's nothing in the world for me except Torah, then you don't even have that Torah at all. כי בוודאי על ידי עוסק התורה לשמה יכול לבוא לקדושה גדולה, כשלומד לשמה ומדבק עצמו בנפשו רוחו ובנשמתו באותיות התורה, אמנם אף על פי כן לא יוכל לבוא לעיקר היראה והאהבה וההשתוקקות לעובדתו יתברך שמו. Right, so he says that It's true that by learning Torah lishma, right, for the sake of heaven, and by really gluing our souls and our very beings to the letters of the Torah, that we can achieve great holiness. But a person can only truly fear and love and yearn for Hashem through tefillah and through the surrendering of self that prayer entails, which I think is a beautiful idea. Learning might be filling you up. Tefillah, in some ways, is emptying you out. Right? Yaakov, we say Yaakov learned in the Beit Midrash of Shem Ve'ever, right? That he was a Talmid Chacham already, whatever that means. And he couldn't daven at that time, right? It was only once Vayikatz mi Mishnato that he got up from his Mishnah learning, that he was able to sort of move past that, that he could actually have this amazing encounter with God. Right, and here the Ma'or Vashemesh does, right? V'hinei yadua me'amar chachamenu zal v'yifga b'makom shetikein tfilat arvit, right? That we know from our Gemara Yerushalmi, our Gemara Bavli in Brachot, that Yaakov Avinu established Tfilat Arvit. Hine lo yada ad ata sod hatfilah ich hi gedola. That Yaakov had not known the secret to davening. That God had not revealed God's self to Yaakov until he really understood the power of davening. Right? And I think that, again, this sort of fits in very nicely with the other ideas, which is like you can't just mumble your way through davening and check it off your list, as I often tell my children, right? It's not about saying the words, it's about encountering the power of tefillah. וזה פירוש המדרש, ויקט יעקב ממשנתו, רצה לומר מתורתו, שנתעורר על ידי התפילה הזאת, והבין שלא בא לתחילת השגה על ידי התורה ליchud. Right? Yaakov awoke from his study of Torah, from his studying in the yeshiva of Shem and Ever, realizing that Torah alone would not bring him to a full awareness of Hashem, of God. And that is what it means, right? The Anochi lo yadati, right? I didn't know Hashem was here, meaning I didn't know that I could access Hashem through this power of tefillah. Right, so when we think about Yaakov and the mitzvah of davening, I think thinking about this pigiyah, this encounter with God, is about more than learning Torah, right? Just like maybe an Am Haaretz can't be a chassid, you could be a chassid and also not be a Torah scholar, right? You could feel the power of you could feel the power of davening without knowing Torah. It's very freeing, right? Like the story of that boy with the flute, right? That when we daven from our heart, that's where we sort of encounter Hashem, not in the only on the page of the Mishnah. And that Maariv, maybe in that sort of dark, like mysterious intimacy, is a place where we can set aside our Torah learning and really come to this encounter with Hashem. And so the last source that I have, although I'm excited for Rabbi Eliakim's source, is from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. I know we'd expressed interest in him, and this is such a beautiful place to study him. He wrote a whole beautiful article called Encountering God, and this is an excerpt of that, where he talks about Yaakov's prayer being different from Avraham and Yitzchak's. Right? So Avraham, earlier he explains, right? Avraham initiates the tefillah. And here he's saying Yaakov does not initiate. Yaakov's thoughts are elsewhere, on Esav, from whom he's escaping, on Lavan, to whom he is traveling. And into this troubled mind comes a vision of God and the angels and a stairway connecting heaven and earth. He has done nothing to prepare for it. It is unexpected. Yaakov literally encounters God as we can sometimes encounter a familiar face among a crowd of strangers. This is a meeting brought about by God, not man. That is why Yaakov's prayer could not be made the basis of a regular obligation. None of us knows when the presence of God will suddenly intrude into our lives, right? So we know that Rabbi Sachs is talking about this halachic debate about whether or not Maariv is obligatory or optional, right? And he's saying, well, maybe the reason that it's optional is not just because it's only about the remains of the korbanot from earlier in the day, but because it's you can't force this kind of intimate connection with Hashem. Sometimes it just happens upon us, right? And he goes on to explain such experiences take place literally or metaphorically at night. They happen when we are alone, afraid, vulnerable, close to despair. It is then that when we least expect it, we can find our lives flooded by the radiance of the divine. Suddenly, with a certainty that is unmistakable, we know that we are not alone, that God is there and has been there all along, but that we were too preoccupied by our own concerns to notice him, God. That is how Yaakov found God, not by his own efforts like Abraham, not through continuous dialogue, right, lasuach, like Yitzchak, but in the midst of fear and isolation. Yaakov, in flight, trips and falls and finds he has fallen into the waiting arms of God. No one who has had this experience ever forgets it. Now that I knew you were with me all the time, but I was looking elsewhere, right? Maybe like the Ma'or V'Shemesh elsewhere in the Torah, maybe elsewhere towards the humans involved in his life. That was Yaakov's prayer. There are times when we speak and times when we are spoken to. Prayer is not always predictable, a matter of fixed times and daily obligation. It is also an openness, a vulnerability. God can take us by surprise, waking us from our sleep, catching us as we fall. I think it's such a beautiful, as always, Rabbi Sachs is so beautiful. Um, and I think he ties in all of the things we were sort of trying to bring together very beautifully to think about the intimacy of nighttime, the sort of unexpectedness of Yaakov's encounter with Hashem, to realize that sometimes we have to put aside the things that we think we know or the things we're supposed to do to find the things that we
This is her screen
are
share.
really looking for. And that is like the beauty of Maariv. So, right, so Maariv is important and the halacha of Maariv is important, but I think when we think about Yaakov, when we think about why daven Maariv, right? After we get off this call, if you're tired, you might think like, I'll daven tomorrow morning. Maariv has this really beautiful element that's not found in the other tefillot of our day. And so I hope this encourages us not just to follow halacha, but also to like find the beauty in that halacha. Now, I would love to hear Rabbi Eliakim's source and whatever else everybody else has to share or reflect upon. Oh, but you're muted, Rabbi Eliakim.
Oh, that was great. Thanks. Birshutech. Two quick things. One sort of a piggyback, if you will, on what Rabbi Sachs says. I heard from the holy mouth of the Baba Rebbe once during Sukkot when he was speaking that the reason, as a Holocaust survivor, he was saying that the reason that Maariv is a reshus is because it's a Laila. After such a Laila as the Holocaust, the fact that we can still go ahead and daven, he said, that is why it's a reshut, because you don't expect anybody to still daven, and yet you pass through that Laila, through that night, he said, and people are still davening.
Hmm.
Similar also, Elie Wiesel has one of his famous points. Supposedly he was in concentration camp. He heard the Rabbanim speaking, and they held a din Torah of God, and they found Hashem guilty. And then
Wow.
they said, "Okay, let's go daven Maariv." But
Beautiful.
I think that's just great. There's a woman in Buffalo who sat there fetching to me in a conservative show at one of my students' bar mitzvahs in Yiddish about how she doesn't believe in anything. This is in show. And when they brought out the Sefer Torah, she was the first one to jump up and kiss the Torah. Anyway, getting back to the Ema B'nim Smecha, one of my favorite divrei Torah, and I usually blog it. The Ema B'nim Smecha, who's always trying to prove the greatness of Zionism and the building of Israel, and the Chalutzim and so on, all the pioneers. So he brings that pasuk of Vayifka B'Makom, and
Mm.
he quotes the Gemara in Brachos, where the Gemara says, Yaakov is saying, "Olay avarti b'makom shavota hipalu sham," which is exactly like both the Maariv Shemesh and Rabbi Sachs. And he had no intention of davening. He
Hmm.
wasn't planning on it. he passed by the Malkam Mikdash where Avram and Yitzchak had davened, and he said, "Oh my God, I just passed by where Avram and Yitzchak davened, and I have to go back there," and thereby established Maariv. And that's why he says, I think some Rabbi Soloveitchik in Chicago mentioned to me, it's based on a Zohar. And then he davened Maariv, and he says, had he not davened Maariv, there could never be a Geula, there could never be Mashiach, there could never be a Binyan Yerushalayim Shlishit, a third Beit HaMikdash, because each one of the three davened from one of the exiles. So he was davening for this exile, and the point that he's trying to make is he took the initiative of going back and davening, and he's speaking about the importance of the initiative for building up Israel.
Interesting, right? That runs a little bit counter to what I was saying, right? That like this idea that Yaakov was intentional about this idea, and that it sort of connects all three together very nicely. Whereas in this way, I think they're all a little bit disparate, right? Yitzchak davens outside, Abraham davens at Har HaMoriah, Yaakov sort of davens where he encounters Hashem. But both are very nice readings. Thank you for sharing that.
So Yael, I sent you something.
Okay.
I sent you a group of photographs from the site where Yaakov had his dream in Beit El.
Oh, I remember. Yes.
So I sent you some photos. I was there a year ago, and I had an official tour of it. And it's in Beit El where I have a good friend, and so we toured it, and it's interesting. It's just they created what they felt was the site of Yaakov's dream.
All right, hold on. Let's see if I can share it with everyone. A test of my capabilities here. And there's something about this which I think is really cool. And there is something that I think like takes away some of that mystery, right? Like you can see that this is lit up at night in like this beautiful way. It is
Right.
like you could almost imagine that's like a pillow of little rocks, you know? I don't know if that's what is intended there, um but there is sort of this idea that like it becomes less mysterious, right? It's like right here,
Right.
cold light
Right.
of day. And yet also, I think there is something, and this sort of ties into what Rabbi Eliakim was saying about like the power of places that hold special tefillot, right? I know that lots of people like to daven at kvarim of, you know, either at like Ma'arat Machpelah or Kever Rachel or you know, wherever the places are, 770 for some, right? That there is like a power to that. And I think that that's not to be taken away, and that that's really cool to be able to say like, wow, Yaakov Avinu laid down somewhere in this like relative area.
Right.
It's cool. Thank you for sharing.
I had one thought. We were talking about the meaning of Maariv. Shachrit, we thank God for returning our soul. I'm assuming that we're back from death. It's like almost a resuscitation kind of thing. It's only because of this, I'm thinking maybe Maariv has a connotation of dying and death, which resolves with Shachrit in the following morning. I don't know if there's any allusion to that somewhere.
You know, I wonder, there is like in I think the pasuk before the paragraph before the Shema, right? There is this idea of like lightness and darkness that gets played with. Let's see if I could pull it up quickly. And there is sort of like a parallel to Yotzer Or in the next morning. Not sure if I could pull it up right now, but I think that there is. I agree with you, Nelson. I think there's like a little bit of a playing between like bringing the darkness in and then sending the darkness back out the next morning. And so, like, what does that mean to have a davening where we say bad and scary and you know nighttime things happen? It's kind of interesting.
Modernir says, so
Yeah.
So he takes it away with Maariv and returns it before Shachrit.
Yeah, here it is. Let's see. Um, see if I can reshare here for a second. I think it's a great point. I was tempted to bring this paragraph and then I didn't. And now in your infinite wisdom, you brought us back here, right? So it's the first paragraph before the Shema at Maariv time, right? And we say here, Borei yom v'layla golel or mipnei choshech v'choshech mipnei or, right? That Hashem, right, creates night and day, rolls the light away from before the darkness, and then the darkness from before the light. Or ma'avir yom umevi laila, umevdil ben yom uvein laila, Hashem tzvaot shemo, right? And God causes day to pass and brings night and separates between day and night. And that makes, right, God the Hashem tzvaot, the hosts in his name. And so there is this sort of idea that like darkness comes and darkness goes um, in a way that I think is quite beautiful. Um, and I think especially before the advent of electricity, right? Darkness was very scary and dangerous, right? We often talk about like the things you don't have to daven in Maariv if you're worried, right? That there's more we daven in Maariv to allow everyone to catch up with us so that no one has to walk home alone in the dark through the fields. Um, and I think one of the things that I love about our traditions are that we don't shy away from those hard things, right? We don't just say in the morning, thank you. We say, thank you, Hashem, for returning our soul that perhaps not with us in the nighttime, right? Thank you, Hashem, for bringing the darkness and bringing the light, because both of those things are true. And Maariv allows us to face those things that are scary, but with confidence in our faith, which is beautiful.
Could also say that there's some allusion to Breshit, that God created the light from the darkness. So
Interesting. Yeah, like a little bit of mini creation every
yeah,
day.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Beautiful. Oh, please, Sherry.
Say real quick that Maariv even affects the time of this group, right? Because
Yes,
in the
that's true. It does because of our minion hero, Nelson here, who we want to be able to daven and make the minion in the summer. And so that's right. Sherry has a great point that we moved the class an hour earlier to accommodate to not be meeting at the same time as Maariv. Um, and I think that it's a great point, Sherry, that I think it's the davening we feel the time movement the most, right? Most places daven at a time that you can daven all year long, right? 7 o'clock or whatever time we daven at Skokie Valley is acceptable throughout the year. And you could daven mincha at about 3 o'clock all year long. But Maariv has to move around the schedule. And it's hard in the night in the winter time. I know Ravari sent out an email, right, saying this is the hardest time of year to get a minion because it's so early. And in the summer, we daven earlier, right? But some people daven, wait to daven until 9 o'clock at night. We really, in addition to feeling the vulnerability of darkness, I think Sherry brings up a good point, which is we feel the vulnerability of, the calendar year as well. It's a great point.
Well, if you lived in Costa Rica,
Hmm.
sunset is between 5:15 and 5:20 all year.
Yes, I have a coworker from Kenya where the same thing is true, right? And I remember that Dr. David Zvi Kalman spoke about this on Shavuos, right? That even in Yerushalayim, the times are less dramatic. But I think it's right. The further we get away from the equator, the more
Right,
drama we feel. Um, so here it's there is a difference, but England for sure there's a bigger difference. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
And my wife is from Winnipeg, where
Oh.
summer sunset is 10 p.m.
Yeah. Yeah, I spent a semester abroad in England and like people said in the summer they just go to bed and it's still Shabbos. They wake up in the morning and say Havdalah because Havdalah could be at 11 o'clock at night.
Stockholm is even worse.
Yeah. Well, and in Alaska, right, there's
Yeah.
23 hours of sunlight in the summer, I think. Certainly, halacha is not designed around these places. Um, but I'm glad you said that, Cherry, because I was trying to think of a funny pun to put in the email about how, like, whether it's optional or not, everyone should go daven at Skokie Valley. Because I think that it is hard to make a minyan at this time of year. So if you are able, male or female, I think adds a lot to the minyan, if you're able to go, especially at this time of year. But even if you daven at home, or maybe even especially because I think, right, davening in the quiet sort of relative intimacy and darkness of your own home is different than in the relatively bright lights of Burger Beit Midrash, that you find that encounter with Hashem in your tefillah, that you remember Yaakov's journey and Yaakov's realizations, and that I hope our davening is not just enhanced by our halachic discussion, but also our discussion about the goals of davening as well. So everyone should have a productive davening week ahead of them and a Shabbat Shalom. And I look forward to learning together next week.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, and a
Thank you,
happy Thanksgiving.
Yashikova.
Thank you. Okay, wonderful. See you soon.